Hey there. Welcome back to the DFS Build NBA edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the showdown slate for the Mavs and Timberwolves. Game 5, Dallas is in Minnesota. I thought the series would be over and we'd be headed to the NBA Finals, but alas, Minnesota pulled out one, and Dallas will be going for the gentleman's sweep here to go up 4-1 and end this thing. That is what I anticipate will happen, but you just never know. Minnesota did show life in the last game for sure. It was a 105-100 win for the Wolves, and I'm assuming they're going to try to use that blueprint, slow down the Mavs, win on the glass, and try to get a win here. So certainly possible, but we're not really going to worry about that too much. We're just going to worry about who are the best plays, who should we be captaining, who are the values that we should actually be interested in, and hopefully we can piece all that together to get to get us a takedown. If you're new to the show, I break down these slates and try to point you to all those different plays and help you out. If I do help you out in any way, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. That way you can get notified to future videos just like this: NBA, MLB, NFL, UFL, you name it. We'll be trying to cover it. We'll also be covering some regular season fantasy football content over the summer as we get into the new NFL season. All right, this video is sponsored by DFS Hero. So if you're in the market for a new lineup optimizer, you can give them a shot. Get a 15% off discount using our link in the video description below. All right, let's get right into it. We got a 209.5 total. The Timberwolves are at home, 4.5 point favorites. Obviously, Vegas thinks they are going to extend this thing, and it's certainly possible. If I was betting on the game, I would probably be betting on the Mavs points here and money line. I think the series is over. And Minnesota just had one last gasp. I especially like Dallas here if Derek Lively can return. I think him being out last game was pretty significant. They were depending on him for 25 to 30 minutes, and he was rebounding really well and getting them some easy buckets inside. So getting him back would be really, really instrumental for them. He is questionable, so keep an eye on his status. Luka Doncic is also questionable. Obviously, he's been playing every game, even with his knee and ankle issues. So I anticipate him to play. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't. He was awesome yet again for DFS purposes last game with a 28-point triple-double, 68 fantasy points, his second best game of the series and of the entire playoffs to this point. So he was in pretty good form despite only shooting 7 for 21 from the floor. Also, let's see what else is there to note for the Minnesota side. Mike Conley remains questionable, but he should play. Obviously, it's a huge elimination game at home, so don't anticipate him sitting. All right, so we're going to switch up the format a little bit today instead of just like going through all the possible captain options, because honestly, I think the more I think about it, I think it's a bit of a waste of time just because you legitimately can captain anybody you want. And we've really seen slates where Drew Holiday and Jaden McDaniels and Andrew Nembhard have been captains on like massive takedown lineups. So you can build a case for just about anybody. And honestly, what I'll do is as I go through the plays, I'll just say, let you know if I like them as a play in general and comment on their projection and ownership and all that. And then also, highlight how much I like them as a captain play as well. All right, so let's get to it. Obviously, Luka looks amazing. He comes in with 64% ownership across the board. That should surprise nobody. Remember, as you get into different contests like single entry, that ownership is going to spike to probably like 90, 95%. I would just imagine everybody's playing Luka in some capacity, and about 25%, maybe slightly more, slightly less, will be having him in the captain slot. No issues whatsoever with Luka at captain. He's getting 60+ fantasy points in every game, and we know he has the ability to completely nuke the slate with 90 fantasy points. So if everybody's going to play Luka and you can get him at 25% in the captain slot and he goes ballistic, then absolutely that is enough reasoning to go eat that chalk. The funny thing about that is it's chalky for a captain slot, but 25% Luka, if he goes completely bonkers, is not that much ownership. You gain a massive edge on the field if he ends up hitting. But if he only gets like 55 to 60 or so fantasy points, and there's a bunch of other guys that pop off, then obviously a really, really expensive Luka is not only going to be roster restrictive potentially, but he's just not bringing you the upside you kind of need at that ownership in the captain slot. Long-winded way of saying love Luka across the board. He's definitely going to be my utility pretty much every lineup I do. But I will be a little bit underweight on captain just because doing so gets you different right away. And he really hasn't been giving us those 80 or 90 point crazy outings. So I'm assuming he'll just get about 60, 65 fantasy points, which is obviously still okay in the captain slot. And I will get exposure to him in the captain slot. I will just be underweight there compared to the field. Kyrie Irving, again, looks good. There's nothing wrong with Kyrie. He's a little bit pricey at 9.8K. A bit of a downer game last game with 25 fantasy points. The reality is, if he's not going completely off as a scorer, he just isn't going to be like a major priority for me. The 2 games he has done really well for DFS in this series, he had 30 plus real points scored. And the 2 games where he struggled, he had 20 or fewer. So if he's not going off, he's going to have a tough time getting there just because his peripherals just are not amazing. He's had more than 5 assists one time in this entire series. He's had more than 4 rebounds one time in this entire series. So those extra stats just aren't really there for Kyrie. And obviously he defers to Luka a lot of times anyways. So the ceiling is not even that great. I mean, I say this all with a grain of salt because the second I say this about a guy, they go absolutely, off. It's just so annoying. It just keeps happening. But that's basketball and that's the playoffs. You just never know who's going to go off. Like last time I talked about the Wolves and Mavs, I was like, the one guy I don't want to captain is Mike Conley. And what does Mike Conley do? Goes and gets 36 fantasy points and was like a captain in a lot of winning lineups. So it's just classic, man. It's just the way it goes. That said, if we're trying to be like realistic about this, if we're building cash lineups or we're building single entry lineups, let's just be real. Kyrie Irving doesn't possess a crazy ceiling for the price that you're paying right now. 9.8K in utilities. It's just a little bit steep. Especially when you have Anthony Edwards at 11.8K, Cat at 9K, and you have like really decent secondary plays and like Rudy, PJ Washington, and of course, I guess even Mike Conley, and maybe even Gafford if Lively is out, and obviously Lively if Lively is in. So Kyrie's fine. I do think he's a decent tournament play in the captain slot. He's coming at 55% owned across the board. I would be a little bit underweight on him on utility just because he's kind of restrictive price-wise and like the ceiling isn't massive and he does have a low floor here. I mean, 25 fantasy points in the last game in a close game, that's pretty brutal. He was 9.6K. So to pay 9.6K for Kyrie to get him in there and he just like doesn't get anything close to what you need. That's not fun. I don't really anticipate that happening. Again, I expect him to show up here because he has been showing up decently enough. 30, 20, 33 real points scored in the first 3 games in the series. So he's been doing a solid job for sure. Just lacks the ceiling that I want if I'm going to pay almost 10K for a guy in utility. So probably not a guy I'm going to get to, especially with him being pretty owned. PJ Washington, man, he keeps burning me. Last 2 times I said I really liked him as a captain play. I'm going to certainly get less exposure to him now, which means he's going to go completely, crazy. But the logic still sticks. 40 and 42 minutes in the last 2 games. I think Derek Lively being out helped him a little bit in the last game. But still, he's 38 plus minutes in every game in this series. They need his size. They need his scoring. For what it's worth, the run has been there. The shot attempts have been there. 10 plus shot attempts in every game. 10 plus real points scored in every game. He has double upside. He has a nice ceiling as a scorer. And while he's not been great, he's had 21 plus 21 plus fantasy points in every game in this series. So he has not been elite. He has not like smashed when I've been asking him to smash. Like if he would have just done anything close to like what he had done in some of those ceiling games he provided in OKC, like a 40 fantasy point outing. If he did that in the last 2 slates and I had him in the captain slot, I might have been winning some serious money. So yeah, that would have been like basically double the production he's been getting me, which is so annoying. At 7K flat, he's a pretty good utility play, though. I mean, he's coming in with 43% ownership. So that's a little bit chalky for utility, but I don't really care. It's a nice little price spot, especially if Lively returns, and then you're kind of stuck in no man's land for Mavs plays with Daniel Gafford at 6K there. And the other side for Minnesota, it's like if Rudy's going to carry a lot of ownership, then PJ Washington looks a little bit more appealing. Then obviously Mike Conley at 6.6K too. You can pivot off of him as well. So the real play for me is not the utility slot for PJ Washington, though. It's once again captain, because PJ Washington's going to carry a little bit of ownership in utility, but he's going to carry like no ownership in captain. I expect him to be like 5 or 6% owning captain for sure. So once again, he is an appealing captain play. but I'm not racing to play him like I had been in the previous 2 games just because he's been burning me. But that's recency bias in a nutshell. So if you don't really care and you're not afraid of PJ Washington potentially sinking your night, I do think he's a pretty interesting captain play. Daniel Gafford looks totally fine at 6K, 23.49 fantasy projection at DFS Hero. Appears in the optimal lineup 33% of the time. All that sounds pretty good. I think he's still totally playable at 6K, even with Lively probably back. And you compare them together just because they both remain pretty nice prices. I mean, Gafford's been getting it done for the most part in this series. 31 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. 22 plus fantasy points in 3 of the 4 games. 31 minutes last game with no Lively there. So, and 29 the game before when Lively checked out early. So I think we can probably expect about 20 to 25 minutes if Lively is back. And if Lively is not there, he's going to play 30 plus minutes and would be a smash play. So if Lively's out, Gafford is a really, really good utility play that I would probably get to quite a bit, and I wouldn't really worry about his ownership. And I'd even consider him in the captain slot just because, he's exhibited a ceiling in the past, and the extra run and no Lively would bump up that ceiling quite a bit. So if Lively's in, I'm a little bit less interested in Gafford for sure because the minutes and the ceiling would just naturally come down. He's still playable at 6K. I'd be a lot less interested in him at captain though. Lively at 5.8 would be a really, really good play, assuming he's not limited or anything. I mean, he has like a neck head issue, but it seems like it was a concussion and or just a sore neck after getting kneed in the head. So I don't anticipate him being limited if he's back. They certainly need him, as evidenced by the last game. And he's been playing like 27 plus minutes every game in this series, and he's been productive, cleaning the glass well, scoring inside decently. So I like him a lot. He doesn't project as well as Gafford, but he should play more between the two if he's in. He's also a solid captain play, but not exactly a captain play that I'll be racing to just because he doesn't have like a monster ceiling. As far as the Dallas value goes, we're looking at Derrick Jones Jr. at 4.8K. Played 34 minutes in the last game. His minutes maybe were a little bit more solidified just because no Lively there, but he'd been playing 33 plus minutes in every game in the series anyway, so I wouldn't really worry about that. He finally popped off in the series for 23 fantasy points, but in the previous 3 games, he had been capped at 17. So not a very high ceiling for him at all. Not a big usage guy, not a really monster per minute guy either. So he's just an okay value that we know is going to be out there for a lot of the game. And for me, that's enough to get me to click his name at 4.8K, but I don't really like him for the captain slot. Josh Green was monster chalk last time. He was like 45% owned. He's coming at 25% now because everybody probably realized that he wasn't a good play. That was one of my big plays of the slate last time. Is I was like, no way I'm eating 45% owned Josh Green. The only thing to like about Josh Green was that he was probably going to get a little bit more run. And he had gotten 21 and 25 minutes in the previous 2 games. So naturally you would imagine that that run would stay or it'd increase. Instead, it dropped down to 17 minutes and he did not get it done with 9 fantasy points. So in a showdown slate for a guy at 2.8K, you could still play him. He's still going to get 15 to 20 plus minutes. And obviously he's cheap, but that was disappointing. And I saw that coming. So that was one of the good calls I had in the previous slate. And right now he's not super chalky, so I'm okay with him. But his projection's 10 fantasy points, and he just have a very low floor and not a great ceiling. So not racing to play him, especially with Maxi Kleber back. So I just think he's less of a priority. Kleber played 13 minutes in his first game back. I would not be shocked if his minutes ticked up considerably, especially if Lively misses. If Lively misses, I'm a little less interested, but 2.2K is a really good price for a guy who could play about 15 minutes and has been a decent per minute guy before. Not on the year though. 0.5 fantasy points per minute. That's pretty bad. But in the past, he's been decent. Jaden Hardy at 2.4K. He's been getting around 10 to 12 minutes off the bench. That's enough to get me interested. He's less owned than both Kleber and Josh Green. So right now of that trio, I'm going to go Jaden Hardy. I mean, none of these guys feel great. That's the reality. So I'm just going to play the ownership game and use the guy who is, he's cheaper than Josh Green. The projection's really close, and he's like 9% less owned right now. So if that sticks, Jaden Hardy looks like the top play the top value play for the Mavs. Tim Hardaway Jr. is not even in the rotation anymore. Condolences, my bud, but he's no longer viable to me. Dwight Powell, 2K flat. He only got 3 minutes last game. So Lively being out really benefited Kleba in his return, and that was about it. So I'm out on Dwight Powell, even if Lively's out. Yeah, that does it for the Dallas side for me. All right, let's go over to the Mavs or the Timberwolves and check them out. So let's see here. Okay. All right. So up top, Anthony Edwards. That should shock nobody. I said he was a really nice pivot off of Luka last game in the captain slot. He had 54 fantasy points, 29 real points, and a double-double with 10 rebounds. Almost had a triple-double with 9 assists. So that was a good call. If you played Anthony Edwards at the captain slot and you had Luka in utility, you could have been well on your way. But you probably just needed Mike Conley, and then you needed to fade that Josh Green chalk. So there's always landmines in DFS. It's just the way it goes. You do really kind of need that perfect lineup, and then you got to find a way to not get duped. And that's really not been happening, right? Like, even if you do somehow finish up top, instead of winning like 5K, you're winning like, $330 with like a bunch of other people. So we just want to take our chances and do things that are going to get us different enough that maybe we can, number one, get up there. And then number two, hopefully not dupe with a ton of people, or maybe not dupe at all. That said, Anthony Edwards looks great. 50% owned across the board. Awesome utility plays because he's a little bit cheaper than Luka. I've been doing the same thing basically every game of the series. I want both Luka and Edwards in my lineup just because they have the best floor and ceiling of anybody. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that. So I like them both in utility. That's fine. And obviously he's less owned than Luka, so he's like the first guy I'll look to pivot off of Luka to gain a little bit of ownership leverage there in the captain slot. Next up, we have Cat pushing for a 40 fantasy point projection in the optimal lineup 40% of the time, which is pretty good. 41% owned, which is totally fine. Coming in at 9K flat price. So I just prefer him over Kyrie. I think the projection is going to be about the same. Their floor and ceiling is pretty similar. He's been good. He hasn't been. He's been good like during the regular season and in flashes, and he's flashed ceiling games in the playoffs, but in this series, he has not topped 34 fantasy points yet. So he actually has not exhibited that ceiling. We know he has a ceiling, but at 9K, he's a little bit steep for me. And I've been saying it all series. I prefer Rudy Gobert. If we're looking at these two guys, you're getting a 1.4K savings with Rudy Gobert, and they're basically the same guy. Cat has topped at 33 fantasy points in every game in the series, and Rudy has had 3 games where he's comparable. He's had 28, 39, and 29 fantasy points in the games where he's technically showed up, and then he had a really bad 19 fantasy point game. So for the most part, even though Cat has been the raw points superior play, when you look at the price, Rudy Gobert has been the better player. So I prefer Rudy here for sure. They're carrying similar ownership. The projection's pretty close, 37 to 34. And then Rudy pops up in the optimal more by 12% at 52. So I think Cat is fine just because he does have a ceiling. If he gets hot from outside hitting his threes, he can pay off. And that could make him an interesting captain play. So I don't mind trying him a couple times in the captain, but I don't think at 9K on this slate, I like him that much at utility. I'm okay getting there as like the last guy in or something. If you only have 9K, or if you have 9.6 and you can't get to Kyrie at that point, it's fine. I don't have a problem with Cat. I just think if you're just looking at floor and ceiling and projection and ownership and what's been going on in the series, I think Rudy is the better points per dollar play, and you're saving cash and you can spend it elsewhere, like on Luka and Ant. All right, I'm not going to tell you not to play Mike Conley. He's only 29% owned across the board right now. So that's pretty good for a showdown slate. So it's almost contrarian, basically. So that's appealing. His projection is just fine at 26 fantasy points. So like he's not really standing out. Excuse me. Let me get a drink of water real quick. So 6.6K in the utility, that's fine. He's been decent in the series with 35 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games, 26 plus fantasy points in 3 straight. So he's showing up here with the season on the line. If you want to try him out in captain a little bit, that's totally fine. At 6.6K, it's not like a really restrictive price in the utility. I don't have a problem with him. He's just fine. He's forever just fine. Just not a guy that stands out really, and just not a major priority for me personally. I will absolutely get a little bit of exposure in the captain slot to him though, just because he burned me last time. And I mean, recency bias be damned. I don't want to be having zero Conley at this point. The guys that really look better, though, are going to be Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid. I said last game, let's leverage that crazy Naz Reid ownership. He came in at 75%, and let's go play Jaden McDaniels. The funny thing is, Jaden McDaniels only beat him out by 1 on fantasy point, but if you faded Naz Reid and played McDaniels or hopefully somebody else, you gained massive leverage on the field. He only played 20 minutes for whatever reason. He only had 6 real points, 15 fantasy points. So McDaniels was the better play. I mean, that wasn't how you were going to get a takedown, but fading Naz Reid was a step in the right direction. So we had the right call there. And the logic behind that was Jaden McDaniels was way less owned, and Jaden McDaniels is much likelier to play a lot of the game as while Naz Reid plays like 20 to 25 minutes off the bench. So let's look at ownership. And once again, Naz Reid is going to project to be more owned, although at this point, the ownership is more split than the gap we saw last time. So when it's like that, I kind of just you're kind of just looking at whatever fits, as you go. I like them both. I don't have a major lean on either. I think once again, since the ownership is so similar, it would just come down to McDaniels plays like 35 to 40 minutes. And Naz Reid he's a better per minute guy. So you can kind of balance those two attributes for these guys and kind of figure it out. But if I'm running a bunch of lineups, I'm just going to split the ownership. And I mean, if you want to gain leverage, I guess you could go heavier on Jaden McDaniels because he's a little bit less owned, but it's just too tight for that really to matter. I think it's just a case where you're going to want a little bit of both of them. They're really good prices. They remain awesome utility plays. McDaniels could be a captain play just because in 2 different slates in this series, he was the captain on a lot of takedown lineups. And if you think Naz is going to have a massive bounce back game, you can try him at captain. I just think he's more of a utility play, and McDaniels I'd mostly go utility and a sprinkling of captain. All right, let's see here. Kyle Anderson remains a really good value at 3.6K. He didn't really crush last time, but again, what are you really expecting for a guy at like 3K? He was 3K last game. He had 19 fantasy points. For me, that is a hit. I have no problem with that. He had 25 minutes last game. He's had 17 plus minutes in every game in this series. He's had 17 plus fantasy points in every game in this series. I'm not going to get away from Kyle Anderson. He is an auto play for me at that price. Don't know why he's only 25% owned right now. I would love for that to stay. That might be not correct. My guess is it would be not correct. But if it sticks, that'd be amazing. 3.6K's price to come up slightly, but I'm still playing slow-mo with the utmost confidence at that price. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a little bit interesting. He played 13 minutes last game. 13 fantasy points, just has not been, connecting on his shots. He's been losing minutes. I don't really trust him. 2.6K is, I guess he's the potential leverage play in Kyle Anderson, but he's coming in at 27% ownership. So not really. That's probably a play that I would get away from personally. The only thing is, where are you going to make up for those funds? Because Dallas's value looks pretty bad. So if you want Luka and Ant together, you might end up, entertaining Nah or one of those Mavs guys. The Mavs guys we talked about, Jaden. It's basically Jaden Hardy versus Nah. I would just lean on the lower owned guy, and I think right now that's Jaden Hardy. So Jaden Hardy is probably my favorite punt right after Kyle Anderson. All right, the Minnesota side. Let's see what else is there. All right, doesn't look like there's anything else. So that does it for me. As far as high-end captains, obviously Luka and Anthony Edwards look the best. I'm willing to roll the dice on PJ Washington again. I have no problem with that. He's probably still one of my favorite, captain plays just because he's not going to be owned. And I don't mind Derek Lively there or Jaden McDaniels, a little bit of sprinkling, but most of my captain ownership is going to be still between Luka and Edwards in this game. And then for some of those values, I'll just leverage it. I think Jaden Hardy over those other values and pair him with Kyle Anderson will get you where you need to go as far as paying for guys up top. All right, that is going to do it for me. Hopefully it helps you out. If I did, give this video a like. And also, please subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel grow, helps me know that I'm doing something right, and also helps you get alerted to future videos. All right, thanks for watching, and good luck.